Hey, we haven't talked about the state of New York State in a while. Today we've got someone from the Assembly, a long time a guest on this show, host maybe sometimes. Steve Hawley will be with us. As always, we're brought to you by those wonderful folks at...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Mendon Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
All right, how about that? We've got a great show for you today. Steve Hawley, he's an Assemblyman from the 139th District, joining us today. Steve's been a regular on this show. He's told us lots of interesting things. Steve, to start with, we are going to be talking with Pam Helming next week from the Senate. So you're in the Assembly. Give us a sense for what the Assembly was like this year.
We've only got 30 minutes, Chris. Not just this past year, but over the past number of years, the State Assembly has become a melting pot, if you will, in so many different ways. We do have a number of folks that currently call themselves comrades, as opposed to my fellow Assembly person. And when they say comrades, they're not referring to veterans, and I'm a veteran, and I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. They're referring to their fellow Socialist Democrats, who now comprise 7, I believe, out of the 150 Assembly folks, each representing roughly 135,000 people. They tend to, even though they're in the minority, obviously, the minuscule minority, they tend to receive a lot of attention from other majority members. The vast majority of the majority are from downstate, primarily the boroughs of New York City. And this is how AOC, whom we're familiar with, got her start. She challenged in a primary a number of years ago an incumbent member of the United States Congress, Joe Crowley, from the Bronx. She was a virtual unknown. And when you have primaries, Chris, as you know, the turnout is normally very, very low. Those primaries now are held in June. And so if you challenge in a primary and win a majority seat, where the vast number of folks are registered with one party, you're guaranteed of winning in November, because either there's a token individual running on another party line in November, or there's no one running. And so if you win that primary in June for Congress or the Assembly or the Senate, chances are you're going to be in office effective January 1st of the following year. That's how AOC got started. She has been recruiting ever since members from down in the city to challenge those individuals in the majority who don't necessarily represent what they believe socialism should be all about in this country, and they challenge them. And we've had a number of folks lose in primaries and take office the following January. So we have a different sort of situation in the Assembly. I'm not sure how it is in the Senate. Pam will be able to tell you that next week. It's not good from my point of view for our constituents, the types of policies that have come out of these folks that are democratic socialists, whether it's bail reform, whether it's inflationary spending beyond all belief, whether it's no respect for pretty much anybody, law and order, and whether it's the belief that everyone ought to be making the same amount of money and the free enterprise system is a bad thing. Those are the tenets that this country was founded on, and as far as I'm concerned, it's worked very, very well.
Well,
There's the short answer, my friend.
let's talk a little bit about this the primary situation. We've seen that happen, as you mentioned, with AOC. We've also seen it happen in the city of Buffalo a couple of years ago when the mayoral candidate, the incumbent Democrat, lost to a socialist opponent. And the city of Buffalo had to write that name in order to re-elect the incumbent, which they ended up doing. So they rejected the results of the primary, kept the incumbent in. And I interviewed somebody from downstate about this afterwards, not just about this specifically, but just about things in general. And he brought up this item specifically about how his newspaper readers, he's a publisher from a paper down in Queens, they were flummoxed by the fact that the city of Buffalo rejected the choice from the Democrat primary. So I think what you're talking about is it's not just rigmarole. It's really how people feel downstate, down in the New York City area. When you talk about this to the people that you represent, your constituents, what's the sort of feedback that you get? I don't think you go into the city of Buffalo, right? You're just outside of that.
But one town over in Erie County.
Right.
The
Yeah.
town of Newstead in the village of Akron, which I've represented the last year and a half. Uh, I think what that election, the general election after the primary, where that socialist Democrat had beaten the Democratic incumbent mayor, Byron Brown, I think what that said in the general election is that members of the Democratic Party, members of the Republican Party, members of the Conservative Party, members of no party, we call them blanks or independent voters, they rejected the results of the Democratic primary and said, we don't believe that socialism will work, and they reelected on a write-in, which is very, very difficult, as you know. They reelected the incumbent mayor Byron Brown and said no, a resounding no, to socialism. So um, I haven't seen socialism. I don't know about you, but in historical perspective, I haven't seen socialism work very well, if at all, anywhere in the world. So I'm not sure why some folks, hopefully they stay in the minority, um, are so eager to have socialism become a way of life and a way of governing and a way of the economy in this country and in this state.
You know, it's interesting. This is now we're going to digress a little bit from what we're going to be talking about, but since we're on the topic, New York State, if you look at the headlines in this year, 2024, presidential election year, New York State is said to be in play. And recent polling shows that Trump is not that far behind President Biden. What do you think is going on within New York State? Is there a fissure growing within the Democrat Party? What would account for Trump's higher than expected poll rating?
Yeah, I'm not privy to what poll or polls you're referring to, but you know, I believe that we saw in the election of 2016 a dissatisfaction with the Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, and the benefactor of that was Donald Trump. I think that we saw a replay in some ways in 2020 for different reasons. People who may have wanted to vote for President Trump, but were uncomfortable with his presentation, if you will, not his policies, because they were arguably unbelievably good for this country, whether it's law and order, whether it was the economy, whether it was the defense. Those policies arguably were some of the best that we've had in many, many years. I think that in that election, however, of 2020, because of the pandemic just beginning, that they were able to disguise somewhat President Biden's infirmities. Now, I have compassion for anyone that in families who are dealing with dementia. My father got dementia late in his 80s and into the early 90s, and it's a very, very, very emotional and difficult thing for obviously the individual that has it as well as those that are charged with caring for him. So I think that in that election of 2020, it became Biden getting more votes than Trump, not because of the rejection of the policies of President Trump, but just his presentation. So we'll see this time where it goes. At church on Sunday, people said, I don't know what to do. I just feel like not voting. And that's not what we need to do. We need to have people vote. And it's not a vote for necessarily someone. It's a vote for the policies that you believe that individual will espouse and try to bring to the fore to better this country. That's the way I've always looked at folks. At people running for office, I say to them, take a look at who they are and what they represent. Take a look if they're an incumbent on how they've voted, not how they say they voted, not how they tell you through the Facebook posts and news releases and press releases, but really dig into it and see if they're really voting the way you'd like them to vote. You'll never get 100% of the time, but at least whatever the percentage is. Make sure that people are really doing what they say they'll do and never, ever stay home. It's such a great right that we have in this country, the ability to elect our leaders who are going to lead, in this case, the state or in the nation in the presidential into the next 4 years for the presidential.
Well, let's circle back to New York State, specifically within your assembly district, and we'll talk about your upcoming town hall meetings after the break in a few minutes. But you've been talking to people for a while. What is the sense that you're getting from them in terms of their biggest concerns they have with what they see coming out of Albany?
Well, if you're closer to an urban area and suburban area, geographically speaking, you're concerned. Most of those folks are concerned about two things. Um, it's either number one or number two, public safety, and the fact that this bail reform, which needed to be done, by the way, we don't need people sitting in jail for minor offenses. Um, we need them to show up for their hearing and for in front of the judge for what they have done or been accused of doing. Uh, but that either it's public safety or it's inflation. With regard to public safety, again, we have folks that are hijacking vehicles at gunpoint and being slapped on the hand and saying, you shouldn't be doing that. Show up, please, for your hearing. And this is a true case in downtown Rochester on down off of Charlotte at Union. And less than 1 week later, the same individual with gun in hand hijacked another vehicle and was again slapped on the hand and told not to do it again. We see every single night, whether it's Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany, and New York City, etc., shootings going on all of the time. And unfortunately, the type of policies that we currently have are not, they're encouraging crime. It used to be an adage that crime doesn't pay. Well, now, unfortunately, the adage is crime does pay. You won't be held responsible for your actions. There is very little respect for law enforcement, which I think is an unbelievably horrific situation that we find ourselves in. Public safety is all about neighborhoods, is all about raising children and grandchildren. It's all about keeping people here within our communities. It's about the economy and people being able to spend money from whence they come. And so we have some serious issues with regard to public safety. Inflation plays right into the economy, as I said. Good grief. The cost of gasoline since 2020 has increased 100%. The cost of many food items has increased anywhere from 15 to 40%, whether it's milk or whether it's meat. It's just above and beyond what many people can do and can afford. And they're having to choose between putting food on the table for themselves and their children or going without and putting it toward their rent or heating bills. So those are the two big issues that I hear from folks: public safety and or the inflationary times that we live in.
All right. Well, when we come back, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about those issues, but also where people can see you in your upcoming town halls. We'll be back after this message.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the State of Greater Western New York report. I'm Chris Carosa. With us today is Assemblyman Steve Hawley of the 139th New York Assembly District. Steve, you talked about inflation, and a couple of weeks ago I was at a press conference at a rural grocery store just outside of Rochester in Honeoye Falls. But there were a bunch of other rural grocery store owners there. And Senator Helming gave a presentation about this upcoming rule, supposedly to take effect next January 1st, which would eliminate several types of refrigerants well beyond those listed by the federal EPA. And the concern is, you talked about inflation. Isn't that going to just exacerbate inflationary pressures at grocery stores, because they're going to have to spend so much money to retrofit their refrigeration equipment? How do you see this? And is the state in any position to delay that mandate?
Well, Senator Helming and I and many others are going to push for a delay in the implementation of not only this particular uh, unbelievable mandate on small businesses and large businesses alike. Uh, the fact of the matter is that small businesses have a more difficult time of having these increased costs of doing business than larger businesses do. Uh, but a business is a business, and this state legislature and this governor have proven time and time again that either they don't care or they don't have the knowledge of what this does, not only to those businesses, but to the folks that are trying to buy goods and services from that business. Um, the same can be said for all of the taxes on gasoline. The same can be said on the electrification of New York State under the Climate Control Act. These are impossible, oftentimes impossible, and highly irregular negative impacts on our economy within our own areas. And so the refrigerant thing is another example. The electrification of our vehicles, of our homes, even new construction now. I think the governor signed this. New construction, whether it's a private residence or whether it's a commercial building, any new buildings have to have charging stations. And that implements, are you kidding me? Chris, you want to purchase, you want to build a new home, and part of that cost now is going to include another $3,000 to $4,000 at least on top of it to have a charging station, even if you don't have an electric car. You've got to have one there. Maybe you could charge your neighbors to come over and use your charging station to help pay for it. And just saying, a lot of out of touch spending and mandates that really are causing businesses not to be able to expand, causing those businesses that would like to perhaps move to New York not to come here, and also, unfortunately, having people leave the state of New York in droves because they can't afford to live here and can't believe the mandates, out of touch mandates, I might add, that are being imposed by this state legislature and this governor.
Yeah, you mentioned out of touch, and one of the really the advantages or benefits of living in a constitutional republic is the ability of voters, citizens, to stay in touch with their representatives, their elected representatives. You've got a couple of town halls coming up very soon, and as well as a program, I think, in September. Tell us a little bit about those, where people can come and see you in person, talk to you, ask questions, express their concerns, and whatever else they normally do at the town halls. Go ahead, tell us a little bit more about those.
Sure, it's a great way to it's a two-way give and take, if you will. One of the most important things that I believe in is communication, and it's better to be able to be a good listener than a conversationalist, if you will. I'm going to have a town meeting. We do it in all of the four counties that we represent: Orleans, Erie, Genesee, and Monroe counties. This particular weekend on the 20th of July, we'll be in Brockport, just a little bit north of the village of Brockport. And by the way, Main Street is still closed at the canal, so make sure you go around to get up to the Seymour Library. That's in Clarkson, just north of the village. And that's for the town of Sweden, the village of Brockport, and the town of Clarkson. We'll be there for 45 minutes to an hour. And again, if you've got things on your mind, whether it has to do with roads, whether it has to do with public safety, as we've already talked about at length, whether it has to do with the direction that the state is going in, or whether it has to do with the Second Amendment, whether it has to do with my long suffering sitting in committee, 2 New Yorks, anything at all that you'd like to talk about, I'm all ears. And we're looking forward to having a nice turnout of citizens from those municipalities. And then we jump up to Hamlin, and we'll be at the Hamlin Library from 11 o'clock until about noon or so for the folks from Hamlin. I do have 3 towns in Monroe County presently, Chris. And next year, if I'm successful in November, I'll be representing the town of Wheatland as well in Monroe County. So we're excited about that. We'll be over in Wheatland and Mumford and Scottsville, over at the Genesee Country Museum in Mumford. I've been there already many, many times over the years, but now as a candidate in that area, I couldn't be happier to be able to represent that great town of Wheatland and Monroe County.
Tell us a little bit, Steve, about this Patriot trip that you're doing in September. What's that all about?
Well, I don't know if you can see it. I happen to have one of our flyers here. I'll hold it up, and maybe your listeners can see that.
Oh, a little bit too close. Back it up a bit. There you go. Oh, the other way.
How's that?
There you go. Yep, yep.
Anything to cover up my face. I know that's what you were thinking, Chris.
Tell us about the Patriot.
A great voice for radio, and I'm very quick to add in self-deprecating humor, yes, and a face for radio as well. Our Patriot trip, this will be our 16th Patriot trip. And I've been in office, obviously, 16 years, maybe even a little bit longer. We offer this trip to veterans and their families and friends to go to Washington, D.C. It's a 4-day, 3-night trip by bus. And we stop at Gettysburg on the way down. We've always had 2 buses, except for the second year we had 3 buses, 150 folks. It was a little too much for our 2 staffers and myself and their loved ones to do. So we do limit it to 2 buses. Go down for 4 days, 3 nights. We stop at Gettysburg on the way down for a 2-hour docent tour. And then on Friday and Saturday, we go to many, many different areas. Obviously, the World War II, the Korean and Vietnam memorials. We visited the FDR Memorial. We've gone to the White House. We go to the Capitol. We've done museums, including the Hazy Museum, aeronautical. We also go to Arlington Cemetery and have a private tour there. And 4 of our veterans are chosen at random to participate themselves in the laying of the wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns. That's a very, very emotional time for not only the folks that are there to observe it, but also our folks who participate in it. And I can tell you a really quick story. Mike Padujic was the World War II veteran back in 2007, I believe, that asked us to put this trip together because a lot of them wouldn't be able to make it. And if you went by bus, and of course there is the honor flight as well, but we do it by bus. If we could do that, he said, well, a lot of World War II guys and gals could be able to make the trip. Some of them were widowers, some of them were widows, et cetera, and unable to get around too well. And so we did it. And Mike Padujic was one of those folks of the 4 veterans that were part of the group going down to lay the wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns. He had his wool fatigues on. They still fit him all those years later. And as they finished the relaying of the wreath, they turned around and came back up the steps to where they started from. And the sergeant, one of the guards, the sergeant looked at all 4 of them, and they were members of the greatest generation at that point. And he thanked them for their service, commended them on being part of the greatest generation. And he took off his sharpshooter badge, or ribbon, not badge, ribbon, and pinned it on the lapel, the collar of that World War II veteran, Mike Padujic. There were tears pouring out of his eyes. I've done 15 of these. I've never seen that happen before. Mike Padujic died several years later. I went to visit him when he was at the New York State Veterans Home in Batavia many times. And when he passed away, I went to the calling hours and the funeral. But at the calling hours, he was in the casket in those same wool fatigues. And that badge, that sergeant from the Tomb of the Unknowns was still pinned. That ribbon was still pinned on him. And there were a lot of tears coming down my cheeks as well. So it's a great, great tribute to those that have served and to the family members who want to come with them. It costs, by the way, it's sponsored I host the trip. It's sponsored by the American Legion, my own post. I'm a veteran, as I said. They sponsor it, and I host it. It costs roughly, because of the great community support, roughly about $450 each. That's for 4 days, 3 nights, all lodging, all food, all admittance, et cetera, et cetera. Very proud to be able to do it.
Well, that sounds actually pretty cool, especially if you like American history, as I'm sure a lot of people do. We have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to get your take on Wheatland because, as you are probably aware, our newspaper covers Wheatland, Scottsville. I know it's new to you. You've been out there a couple of times. It's not too different from some of your other towns that you currently cover. What are some of the things that you take away from Wheatland, or that you expect to, in terms of Wheatland and the town, and maybe what they're
Yeah.
concerned with?
And I think you said it well, Chris. It's not very different at all from the rest of my district. My district has a great amount of agriculture and small businesses. They have very, very strong fire departments, volunteer fire departments. They have a feeling of community, whether it's in Scottsville or Mumford or any part of the town of Wheatland. The one thing that they do have there is that great Genesee Country Museum. And I've been there many, many times over the years, and absolutely love it, whether it's during the Christmas season and everybody's out there by many, many of these structures that have been reincarnated, if you will, and brought to Mumford to be put at the museum out amongst all the rest of them. I went to a Celtic fair a couple weeks ago on Sunday, had a great time there. And yeah, it's going to be very, very similar to our district. I'm very excited about representing that area. I'll be over there for a number of events that are coming up, and I'll be knocking on your door soon to introduce myself. Not as a new guy necessarily, but as a new representative who's anxious to be able to get to know the folks over there.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for being on the air. And also, thank you all for watching this episode. Remember, if you want to be a member of the live audience, that's the only way to ask questions during the actual show. Go to stateofgreaterwesternnewyork.com and scroll down that screen if it doesn't appear there and just sign up for free. And every Thursday morning, you will receive for free the invitation to attend the virtual studio. That's the way you can ask questions. Now, I realize a lot of people work and it's tough to get away on noon on Thursdays. So if you want to see the show, you could just go to that same website, stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, look at our archives, and you'll be able to see the show there. Or you could join our Facebook group or subscribe to our YouTube channel, and the show is rebroadcast every Sunday at 1:30 p.m. Those platforms will notify you when the show begins to air. So that's it for this week. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye for now. And as always, we are brought to you by those wonderful folks at, not them, but how about these folks?